Hi everyone, this is a 10-minute crash course and overview of APA style. And in this video, we're just going to take a look at a paper that has been properly formatted in APA to get a sense of what all of the different moving parts are in developing and formatting your research papers, your excerpt commentary units, any paper that you're writing for a class that requires APA style. APA style comes from the American Psychological Association. That's what APA stands for. And the reason we use a style manual in education, in the social sciences, in anthropology, and psychology is so that there's a common understanding of how information is going to be presented. It lets us as readers focus on the content rather than figuring out, how did you decide to cite your sources this time? And no, APA style is not just about your references page. If it was just about your references page, we wouldn't need a whole manual to figure out how to write an APA. So the book is going to cover, as you're going to see in the rest of the tutorial, all of the different elements, from the title page to the references page to language choices, using a singular they over he or she when you don't know the gender preference of the author, etc. Okay, so let's just take a look at a paper as a whole. All APA papers are going to start with the title page. Okay, those titles need to be focused and to give the reader an indication of what you're going to talk about and really what point you're going to make. Okay, you're going to notice right away that there's a header in APA. It's always going to be on the left, your running head. This is a shortened version of the title. Running heads come from the history of turning in papers to publishers as actual pieces and piles of paper. And usually the documents were so long that they couldn't staple them together. So if a publisher is running around with 3 people's papers and gets tripped by their dog and drops everything and they go whoosh all over the floor, it's really easy to know which pieces of paper go with which paper because they can look at the running head and resort them back out. That's why you have to have a running head. On the right side over here, you're going to have your page number. So page numbers are always going to be top right corner, and page numbers are always going to start on page 1. So if your professor gives you a page count for a paper and says you need to write a 5-page paper, page 1 does not count, neither does page 2, the abstract. Okay, so you're actually going to, for a 5-page paper, going to write a 7-page paper, right? Because the first 2 pages don't count. Most professors are going to hand you more of a word count to give you a sense of how many words you need to write, because other things can affect page count too, like tables and images and artwork that you might be putting into the paper as well. As we move on to page 2, we see an abstract. An abstract is a summary of the paper. So it's going to give the reader an indication of the content and topic you're going to talk about, also your main points. So what argument are you making and what conclusions are you going to come to? This eventually turns into the abstracts that you see in the library databases. When you're searching for a topic, you can read that abstract to find out if it's worth taking the time to read the entire article. Is it going to be useful to you? For you as a student, writing an abstract serves the purpose of creating a space for you to self-check, to summarize your paper and make sure you're saying what you think you're saying. Some people like to write the abstract first. It helps focus their first draft. I tend to write my abstract kind of halfway through after I've kind of done the first draft. This lets me kind of make sure I know what it was I wanted to say. It gives me a chance to pause and go, all right, this is what I think I'm saying, so that when I edit, I can really see if that's what I'm actually saying. Others just write it at the end. They figure I've refined my writing, I know what I'm saying, the paper's kind of done, now I'll go back and write the abstract. That's entirely up to your writing style and your kind of workflow, but you do need to have an abstract and it will appear as page 2. Page 3 and beyond is the main body of your text. You're going to notice the title of your paper reappearing here. So rather than putting the word introduction at the top of the paper, in APA we relist the title. And it's presumed that the next few paragraphs are going to be part of the introduction of the paper. As we scroll down, you're going to see that the body of the text is always going to be left aligned, right? So it's going to have a jagged edge over here. It's not justified text. The paper as a whole is going to be in 1-inch margins. Okay, and while the new style manual, the 7th edition that most of you have right now in your hands, is going to say that you can use Arial 11-point font or a number of other typeface choices are available on page 44. Typically, most professors are likely to still say use a serif font. It's easier to read. It's got all those little tags at the bottom, like Times New Roman in 12-point font or Cambria in 12-point font. For the art education courses, you're going to want to use a serif font in 12 points. Okay, I don't like to read Arial, so you're stuck with my preference there because I'm the one reading your papers. As we continue to scroll down, you're also going to notice that the paper is double spaced everywhere. There are no extra spaces in between the headings and the next section. So it's just a nice, even double space as we go down. You're also going to see different heading levels, right? Headings are appearing flush left. Okay, they're also appearing tabbed flush left, but then italicized. Later on in this paper, when you open up the example, you're going to see some things tabbed in. APA asks you to use different heading levels to indicate to the reader the hierarchy of the information being presented. So if we scroll down a little bit more to the top of a new section, like theoretical framework, your level 1 heading is going to be centered. It's like new section right here, right in the center. And then any subsequent kind of section level 2s, main topics underneath that section are going to be just flush left in bold as well, like this, and participants in recruitment. Okay, methodology, again, new section right in the center. But methodology, you'll see in this particular example, has a lot of subsections. So we go into methods under methodology. And then we go in flush left, bold, part 1. But under part 1, there are a couple of things to talk about. Oh, I take it back, there aren't. Part 2 has a couple of things to talk about. Part 2 is also a level 2 heading under part 1. So part 1, part 2. Now under part 2, now there's a couple things to talk about, interviews, etc. So you can see we've hit a level 3 heading. Level 3 headings are flush left, bold, and italics. Okay. Level 4 headings are not italicized, but they are indented. So you need to know how to organize with headings the subcategories of your paper. Most of you will only use level 1, level 2, and level 3 headings. All right, so as we continue to scroll down, the last pages of your paper are your references. So this is where you're citing all of the sources that you, and showing all of the sources that you have parenthetical citations for in the paper. We'll go scroll back up and talk about those in a minute. Your reference page, you'll notice references is not bolded. Neither was the word abstract, by the way. References are always going to start on a new page, so they're not going to appear up here. Okay, so you're going to want to insert a page break. Names are always alphabetized, and you're going to notice right here this space, right? This is called a hanging indent. References have a hanging indent, so it's really easy visually to scroll down and just search for a particular last name. Just visually creates a highlight for your eyes on last names. You're also going to note that there are commonalities across references, right? In APA, there's always the last name and the first initial. We don't use first names in APA. I don't know why. But you're always going to reference the last name of an author, their first initial, and then if there are multiple authors, you keep listing them. The date of publication, the title of the blog post or book or article or video. And then you start to head towards where did these things come from? Okay, so was it a website? Was it a journal? Right, like Qualitative Inquiry is a journal. Is it a publishing group? Quarto Publishing Group, right? So you work from really small, who is the author, who wrote this particular piece, to what is it called, to where did you find it, where did it come from? And we'll do a longer tutorial on the details and some of the weirder details, like strange capitalizations, deep hanging out. No, none of these words are capitalized. We'll talk about those later in the other tutorials. The last thing I want to talk about a little bit as we scroll back up is these parenthetical citations, right? So inside your paper, if you are using information from something from your references page, you have to point out where it came from. in your paper. You have to cite that source. And APA is going to use parenthetical citations, and the name of the author and the date become very important. So I'm just scrolling back up to where I talk about John Dewey a little bit, because this is a good place to see a couple of different examples. I'm going to zoom in a little bit. Okay. In APA, the biggest thing you want to remember is that if the author's name shows up, the date immediately follows it. Let me say that again because it's really important. If you put the author's name in your paper, the date of the publication has to follow it. And you can see right here, it doesn't matter if I say John Dewey noted that materials are the mediation between the artist and his impulsions, right? And I'll admit in the new APA manual, this can be they because it's a general first person singular reference, okay? So you can tell this paper was written before the new manual. John Dewey noted 1934. You don't have to say 1934 out loud if you're reading this to somebody. John Dewey, 1934 noted, right? We don't say that out loud, but it does need to be here because Dewey's last name is here. And in this case, I'm using John Dewey in the body of the sentence, but you don't always have to do that. You can see in the next sentence, I say materials mediate between the thoughts, emotions, and ideas of the artist and the ultimate art object created to express. That idea is Dewey's, it's not mine. So I'm citing Dewey in the parentheses. I don't need his first name because it's a parenthetical citation, but I do need his last name. And where his last name is, the date shows up. Okay, author, date, author, date. Okay, you're going to do this throughout your paper to note whose ideas you're using to make your argument. Okay, authors, if it's a lot of people, like this one, Hetland, Lois, Winter, Vanema, and Sheridan. 3 or more authors. In the new manual, you can use et al. Right away. Et al. Is just an abbreviation that means Hetland and the other authors, right? So Hetland and the other authors. Note that developing craft is an essential studio habit of mind. Okay, this here, again, this used to be the first reference, right? So if you're moving from the 6th edition manual to the 7th edition manual, the first time you use that particular reference, you have to list everybody out. In the new manual, they've made your life a little easier. You can just immediately say et al. Isn't that nice? So parenthetical citations have to show up. They have to have the author. They have to have the date. And there are some other rules to paraphrasing versus direct quoting that we'll go into later. But in terms of the overall paper, this is your 10-minute crash course.